Well folks, it seems even the federal government isn't immune to a good old-fashioned judicial smackdown. In a move that surprised absolutely no one paying attention, a federal judge in San Francisco has temporarily halted the mass firings of probationary federal employees. This all started when the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, as the cool kids call it, decided it was time for a focused review. Now, I'm no bureaucrat, but I'm pretty sure a focused review is government speak for mass firing spree. The judge, William Alsop, saw right through this charade. He basically told the OPM, "Hold your horses, Sparky. You can't just waltz in here and start firing people willy-nilly." And he was right. The OPM had overstepped its authority. Big time. See, the power to hire and fire federal employees rests with the individual agencies, not some bureaucratic overlord in Washington. This ruling is a big deal, folks. It's a reminder that even in these crazy times, the law still matters. It's a win for common sense, for due process, and for those poor probationary employees who were caught in the crossfire. Now, you might be wondering, who are these probationary employees and why were they targeted? Well, probationary employees are basically the new kids on the block. They're the ones who are still trying to find the bathroom and figure out how the coffee machine works. They're in their first or second year on the job, or sometimes they're longtime workers who are starting new positions. So, naturally, the OPM decided they were the easiest targets. The agency sent out directives to over 24 federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, the Park Service, and even the National Science Foundation. They basically told these agencies to start firing their probationary employees, and to use a handy-dandy template email citing performance reasons. Now, I'm not saying that all of these firings were unjustified, but the sheer scale and speed of these dismissals were deeply concerning. We're talking about tens of thousands of people losing their jobs, folks. People who work in all sorts of important roles, from forest fire prevention, to airport operations, to veteran support services. These are essential workers, people who keep our country running, and they were being tossed aside like yesterday's garbage. It was a disgrace. Thankfully, someone was there to stand up for these workers, the unions. A group of unions, led by the American Federation of Government Employees, filed a lawsuit against the OPM. They argued that the agency's actions were not only heartless, but also illegal. And they were right. The unions pointed out that the OPM had overstepped its authority, and that the mass firings were nothing more than a blatant attempt to gut the federal workforce. They also argued that the firings were a form of mass employment fraud. After all, many of the termination notices were based on false or misleading information. The OPM had even imposed a 200-character limit on the explanations that agencies could provide for retaining probationary workers. Can you believe that? 200 characters. That's barely enough to write a decent tweet, let alone explain why a valuable employee deserves to keep their job. The union saw this for what it was, a blatant attempt to silence dissent and punish workers for exercising their right to organize. Judge Alsop's ruling is a huge victory for the unions and for all federal employees. It's a clear message that the courts will not tolerate this kind of blatant disregard for worker rights. Of course, the fight is far from over. The government is appealing the ruling and the case could drag on for months, if not years, but for now at least there's a glimmer of hope. This case is about more than just the fate of a few thousand probationary employees. It's about the soul of our government. It's about whether we value public service or see it as something to be gutted and privatized. It's about whether we believe in fairness and due process, or whether we're content to let the powerful trample over the rights of the vulnerable. The stakes couldn't be higher, folks, and we need to pay attention because what happens next will affect all of us.